All right, everybody, welcome back into the Auburn Live Basketball Show. Appreciate everybody for joining us. I'm Justin Hokanson. With me, as always, Alan Head. What's up, man?
What's going on? Doing good, man. Doing good. Not as interesting a seat as you are right now, because obviously our very own Justin Hokanson is watching practice while also doing a podcast. Don't say he's not multi-talented, everyone.
No. If I flip the camera, I'm going to get kicked out forever. I'll let you see what I'm seeing, top secret stuff. Watching a little practice. They started a little bit late. We were recording this on Thursday, and I wanted to get some practice in. They probably got out here about 5, and so wanted to watch some of it and figured I could do the show while watching some practice, man.
I like it.
All right, we got a lot to talk about. First, real quick shout out to Session Cocktail, sponsor of the show, sponsor of the Auburn Live shows, football show as well. Give them a visit right there on Magnolia Avenue in downtown Auburn. If you were ever in town, before or after dinner, great spot. Happy hour 4 to 7. Great spot if you're in town for weekend games. Be a good spot on Tuesday night if you want to come in town, have a drink at 6:30, pop over to the game against Arkansas at 8. But yeah, great drinks, great old fashioned. By the way, there's obviously a session in Tuscaloosa as well. So if you're an Auburn fan traveling for the game, go ahead and get in town, eat lunch in Tuscaloosa or something, pop by that session, and go have a drink if you want before the game at 3. And if you pop in there, those people probably don't care about me, but the owner, I don't know if he'll be there or not. But anyway, I don't even know if they'll be open, actually. But it's worth a shot. If you like session, you want to go have a drink, go give it a shot, see if they're open before the game on Saturday, man. All right. A lot to talk about. Obviously, we need to chat about the Florida game.
Yes.
The Vanderbilt game. Listen, we talked about it last week. I mean, we couldn't stress enough how good we thought Florida was. I mean, I kept going back to, I'm telling you, Florida's good. I think the roster's set up to match up and play with Auburn.
Mm-hmm.
Played great. They took it to Auburn. You just got to give them credit. They played great, and they took it to Auburn. I mean, Bruce has said it multiple times that he kind of just gives Florida credit in that game, and I agree. I mean, I don't know. I mean, man, I really do give a lot of credit to Florida for just playing really well and taking it to Auburn. I don't know that could Auburn have played better. I'm sure there are areas, of course, that they could have played better, but I give Florida a lot of credit for that. I was a little concerned about Condon and how Condon for sure. Those guys are athletic enough, and Condon's athletic enough to play Broom one-on-one, and that's kind of what happened. They made it tough, and Auburn just really didn't shut anybody down. Walter Clayton went off, which is not what you need, and they played well. I would say the one thing, and I'll get your thoughts on them. The one thing I thought I was disappointed about, not losing, because I think Florida can win the national championship. It was Auburn jumping to a 10-point lead, and then Florida finding their footing and turning that into a 10-point lead, a 20-point swing in the first half. That can't happen at home. And I thought even into the second half, it ballooned to 17. I thought Auburn showed some frustration. They seemed to almost show some surprise, like, what the heck's happening to us out here? That's the one thing, and maybe they'll learn from it. But a team this old that's been through some of the games they've been through this year, I hated to see that, whereas I would have loved to have seen, like, Florida's really good, and they made their run, and we're fine, guys. Long game. And they almost were like, it almost being at home hurt. Like, I almost feel like at home it hurt them because I think the crowd was sort of the same way. Like, what is going on? And I thought it hurt and it ballooned, and I didn't love to see that. They finally kind of started to claw back in the second half.
Yeah.
Okay, let's make it this. They got it down to 9, but that's probably losing was not that disappointing. It was maybe the way it happened and sort of letting that thing get out of control when you're at home that I thought they could have avoided. What did you think watching it?
No, I think you tapped into probably one of my number one takeaways, which was the body language at times. And while this team has been through adversity, and they've played a great schedule, I think this is the first time where they kind of realized we're up against a team that's the same caliber as us outside of Duke, right? And they were just a little bit taken aback at the fact that when they countered against Florida at times, they would make little small runs, and then Florida would do exactly what they needed to do to push it back out. And it just felt like the team never got settled and never got comfortable. And again, you have to give a lot of credit to Florida. Florida is probably the most balanced team in the SEC, in my opinion.
Yeah.
doesn't mean Auburn can't play better, and doesn't mean that Auburn can't beat Florida. I 100% believe that they can. I also thought that Janai was favoring his ankle a little bit more. You could just tell, not necessarily even favoring, but the explosion wasn't there. Just that, and going against two bigs like Howe and Condon, you've got to have everything, man. Like you can't be hampered any small bit athletically, just because they're so physically gifted. But you mentioned it, Walter Clayton Jr. absolutely got off. Howland Condon can get theirs, but you can't let him also shoot the basketball the way that he did, and he shot the cover off of it, my man. And so that was probably the difference in the game. And Auburn didn't have a great shooting performance. I think Auburn probably brought their B game, and Florida brought their A game. And if Auburn had brought their A, I think it would have been a much better game from Auburn's standpoint. And again, hat tip to Florida. Great team. Ty Golden has done a phenomenal job with the guys that he's brought in. And this wasn't a situation where Ty Golden went out and grabbed blue chip after blue chip. I mean, Howe and Condon were 3-star guys. One's from Australia, one's from Pennsylvania. I don't think either one of them were overly highly recruited. I mean, I think they had some other Power 5 offers, but they weren't guys that were just, McDonald's All-American types. So it was a really great eval job by him. And they've blended it very well together. But again, I like that Bruce gave credit to Ty Golden. I like that he gave credit to Florida. That was due. Florida won that game outright. Does that mean that Auburn can't play better? No. You're absolutely right. They can. And I think they will if they match up again because, A, it's really difficult to beat a team twice. 2, I think this one will stick with them. If there's the potential that Auburn might have been a little overconfident coming into this game, ESPN being there, Janai Broom kind of hanging out in the, with the camping students and all that stuff. There was just a lot there that week. And was Auburn potentially distracted just a little? Maybe. I'm not going to pin it on that. But I think there's a lot of layers to when you have a loss that way. And I think there can be a lot of things that lead into it. It's predominantly that Florida's that good. But I think there were some other factors. And I don't believe that same level of distraction might be there the next time Auburn and Florida match up, and I would expect Auburn to do better. Again, credit to Florida. They deserve it. They were the better team that night.
Yeah, I was looking back a little bit at that. So effective field goal percentage defense, that was the worst game of the season for Auburn. Florida shot 58.6 effective field goal percentage. The second worst game this year was 57.8. That was Duke. That's your 2 losses. So the 2 worst games Auburn's played in terms of a field goal percentage defense, they've lost. 58.6 being, by far the highest.
Sure.
And then also you look at the 2 worst games Auburn's played in terms of 2-point defense, Duke and Florida, percentage-wise, they lost. So it's like it's obvious stuff, right? Like, but it just shows this team, like defensively, they've been really good.
Yep.
At times, there are little moments where they've given up runs, things like that. But for the most part, they've been really good defensively. The 2 games they've lost, their defense has failed. They gave up 84 to Duke and 90 to Florida. That was sort of the weird thing. They just didn't stop anybody. Generally, especially guards, they had really given opponents trouble, especially the guard position. Clayton just got whatever he wanted in the first half. And Houck got his, and Condon got his, and Richard got his, and they just didn't shut anybody down. It almost looked like as the game went on, they got more confused, and in terms of what they should be doing. And Florida ran some good stuff, man. I mean, it's
they
put a lot of pressure on the bigs. I talked about it to get out there. The bigs didn't really get out there. They got some open looks, and then when you do, they can dish it to big men who can move the same way Auburn can do with Janai Broom. And so I think you just give a lot of credit to Florida for that game. Auburn offensively in that game, not one of their best, but not an atrocious game. But
no,
look at it, it was in terms of their offensive efficiency though, it was the 3rd worst game behind South Carolina and Georgia. So they got to 81, but they were not efficient. They missed 20. And the difference for Auburn was, 1, they give up 13 threes. That you're going to. And then the other thing was 2-point offense. Auburn was 23 of 48 from 2-point in that game. 25 shots you missed inside the arc. Tack on another 15 shots from three. You missed 40 shots. You missed 40 shots, man. Like you're gonna lose to the best teams in the country if you go miss 40 shots in a game. So it was just I give Florida a lot of credit. I give Florida a lot of credit for that. Bruce talked about sort of thinking it might be time for a letdown.
Sure.
And I don't even know if I mean, it was a little bit of a letdown, but again, man, like Bruce said today, Auburn has 2 losses and they're to Final Four teams. They're to teams that there will be national championship picks for Duke and Florida. Same with Alabama. So it's not who they lost. It's maybe a little bit of how they lost.
Yeah.
In those games. Fine. They come back. They rebound nicely against Vanderbilt. 12-point win in Nashville. Really impressive. I was there. Really one of the more fun games I've been to. Thousands of Auburn fans inside that gym took it over. They were absolutely a difference in that game. Chaney Johnson, that 9-0 run by Chaney to give Auburn an 8-point lead, and the way the Auburn crowd was reacting during that run, chanting, let's go Auburn, and defense. It was really cool moment. I mean, Chaney's just bucket. The crowd's getting louder. They call that timeout, man. And Auburn, the bench comes off the baseline and mobs Chaney at half court. The resilience they showed in that game because they come out firing. Vanderbilt comes back, ends up taking a lead in the second half, and then Auburn finds their resolve and builds that thing back up to a 16-point lead with a few minutes left. So I was really impressed with the resolve right there. If Vanderbilt came all the way back, you easily could have had an Auburn team coming off a loss, just gave up a huge lead on the road. They easily could have gone, we're just tired, man. Here we go again. And they just sort of bared down, got off the mat and won that game in impressive fashion, a place that Tennessee didn't do it. Kentucky didn't do it. So it's a worthy win. And I liked some of the resilience they showed to bounce back in the middle of that game and sort of win going away.
No, I think you said it all. It is the resolve. And this is a quality Vanderbilt ball club. I mean, this is a team that, like you talked about, they beat Kentucky in their place. They beat Tennessee in their place. This is not a Vanderbilt team like last year's team underneath Jerry Stackhouse. And this is not me making a slant towards Jerry Stackhouse.
Yeah.
Great basketball mind. But that team last year kind of packed it in on him some. Very different team this year. And Bruce talked about that. This is a basketball coach, probably top half of the league, a guy that went out. Vanderbilt showed they were invested in NIL and went and got really good players. And they've bought into the way that they want to do this. So credit to Auburn for being able to come back because you're right. To jump out to the kind of lead to, again, very similar to Florida, right? They jumped out to, what was it, a 17-4 lead?
Yeah, 15-0.
15-0 to start the game. Vanderbilt comes all the way back, goes ahead with by 2 points in the second half. I think it was 47-45 was the first lead they took. And then kind of held the lead for a little bit, and finally they started to ride Chaney. Like you said, he went on that 9-0 run by himself, this is the Chaney Johnson breakout moment if you were looking for one. He's had glimpses before where he's played really, really well, but this was the time where when you needed a bucket, you went to Chaney Johnson and he got it for you. That's a different level. Like before, he's been a compliment player, right? He's never been a feature guy. And in those moments where Auburn absolutely had to have it, they went to him and he delivered. And I was very proud for him in that moment because, as Bruce talks about quite often, he's the hardest working player on this team. He's the kind of guy that if he's getting the buckets for you, other guys are excited for him. You talked about they mobbed him at half court. That's the kind of work that he puts in, and they see that. They know what kind of teammate he is, how he sacrificed for this team this year. So it was truly special to see him have that moment. But again, the unwillingness to give in to adversity, that's the big part of this. This is an easy thing you could have buckled on because you just lost one to Florida. You feel like momentum's turning against you. You're not on your home court. But to bow your back right there, Chaney comes up with 9 points, and then everybody plays better coming off of that, right? Tahad then gets, a nice little run going. I think he hit a 4-point play right there coming off of the heels of Chaney's little 9-0 run. Janai finally started kind of getting it going there in the second half. After that, ended up with 17 points. So a lot of things started working for Auburn, but they just needed something to break in their favor to kind of snap that momentum swing that Vanderbilt had going. And once they got that, you saw the talent level take over, and Auburn was able to kind of reassert its dominance there. So fantastic to see them come back. And now, obviously, you got to go on the road again to Alabama, which is not an easy game, especially when you're playing your arch rival.
Yeah, and by the way, they're starting to if it gets too loud, just tell me. So what they do at practice, they'll come out, they'll work on what they just did in the film room. They'll come straight out and they'll go over offensively and defensively a bunch of sets that they just reviewed. Then they'll get to stretching, and then they'll really start practice, which is kind of what they're doing now. So there's a lot more motion and talking and all that kind of stuff going on. If it gets too loud, just let me know. But yeah, really the only thing they didn't do well was they gave up too many offensive boards to Vanderbilt. But Vanderbilt, that was probably the only thing. I think Vanderbilt had about 14 offensive rebounds. That was a negative. The rebounding was, I think it might have been finished even for that game. But But Vanderbilt's an undersized team. But look, Vanderbilt did the same. They were right there with Tennessee rebounding. I think they out rebounded Kentucky. So Vanderbilt, despite being a little smaller, has done this a few times. They've been out rebounded more times than not. But they've done this a few times where they're more competitive than you think on the boards. But that was probably the only negative. There were some times where Dylan, I think, got caught standing around, and there's some guys that got some offensive boards. But other than that, I mean, they played really well, hit 9 threes. They were 21 of 34 inside the arc. That's incredibly efficient, obviously. And you score 80 on the road. And Denver getting his confidence back and hitting 5 threes was nice to see. And again, it's a game where you look up and you win by 12 on the road. You score 80, and Miles Kelly hit 1 3. And Janai was not super efficient. So it's, again, you can just look at this Auburn team and go, there's not necessarily one thing that has to happen. Janai would probably be the closest thing to that. Like, if Janai goes and scores 6 points, okay, it's probably going to be a struggle. I don't think they're going to beat a really good team. If Janai goes for 6, like, beating a really good team is going to be tough. Outside of Janai getting his, which he generally is even if he's not super efficient, which he wasn't against Vanderbilt, he missed a lot of shots again. But as long as he kind of gets his, there's not another thing that they need. They don't need Miles to get 15. If he does, great. But if it's not Miles, it's Denver. And if it's not Dylan, it could be Chaney. And Chad scored 6 points, and it didn't matter. So, again, with this team, it's like they're finding ways to win in a lot of different ways. That's why they're 22-2. It's going to take a very, very good basketball team to beat them for 40 minutes. Duke is, Florida is, Alabama is. There's not many. And so I think they come away. That was a really nice win. And all of a sudden, by the way, a place that used to be a tough place to play, Memorial, Auburn's won like 4 straight there or something like that, or 4 out of 5, I think, there. So all of a sudden they found some nice success winning there. I think they won 8 out of 9. You remember when they had lost 13 straight games to Vanderbilt going into about, I don't know, 8 or 9 years ago. Now they've won 8 of 9 against Vanderbilt. There for a while, man. Really good offensively every year, and Auburn just could not figure them out. All right, so Auburn's 22-2, 13 quad 1 wins, 5 clear of Kentucky, A&M, and Alabama, which just shows you the SEC. The top 4 teams in quad 1 wins are all SEC. But they're 5 clear of the next best team in quad 1 wins. They're still number 1 in KenPom. They're still number 1 in the net. They're still the number 1 overall seed projected by Joe Lunardi. All of that after the Florida loss. So they're still in great position resume-wise. And look, even losing to Alabama will basically not affect them. Now, they could switch spots seeding. Alabama could potentially be the number 1 overall seed type deal, but they're just not going to drop that much. This is a game that matters a lot for the SEC championship. Obviously, winner of this game gets first place outright for the time being.
Yes.
But man, it'll be fun. 1 versus 2. We talked to Bruce Pearl. He reminisced a little bit about Tennessee Memphis, which is crazy, by the way. That is so wild that I think the last 1-2, that Tennessee 1-2 in 2008, was number 1. Pearl coached in it.
Yes.
Pearl was the road team in it.
Yes.
They were 2, but Pearl was the road team. Pearl coached in it, and it was an in-state rivalry. And here we are again, 1-2, Auburn, Alabama. Pearl's on the road, involved in it. That's pretty wild. But he he talked about there's not necessarily anything he could take from that to this. It's certainly a big gap in
Sure.
years. He thinks his team's mature enough to handle it. He talked about, look, the last 2 times Auburn's gone to Alabama, they've almost won. I mean, you forget these teams have split the last couple of years, but Auburn has handled business at home. Auburn last year went and lost by 4. You remember Chad went to the line, missed a couple of free throws, but that game was right there for the taking. And 2 years ago, when Auburn wasn't great, they had a double-digit lead and lost in overtime. So the last 2 times Auburn's gone to Coleman, they have been right there to win. Of course, Bruce said, hey, I'd give anything to be in a one-possession game late in this one. But, he talked glowingly about Alabama, how great their offense is, how good they are, obviously. But he thinks his team will be, mature enough to handle the situation. It's going to be electric. It is. It's going to be crazy. If Alabama gets off to some kind of hot start, it's going to be, bonkers. It's going to be so loud, but I do think Auburn's got the team and the maturity out there to handle some of that. But what are some of the things you're thinking about heading into this game? By the way, I looked at the analytics. Torvik has now switched, and it is 50-50 on this game. 50%. The analytics, I always go by Torvik. I always look at
Sure.
They've got Alabama by 1 point. And I'd have to go back and look. Auburn's been projected to win every game this season, literally until the last week. I mean, this analytics just flipped within the last handful of days. But it's, I don't know what the Vegas line is, but I would imagine you'd think it'd be high scoring. You're talking about the number 1 and number 2 most efficient offenses in the country.
Mm-hmm.
Auburn's a top 20 defense. Alabama's a top 40 defense. I do think they're probably not as bad as you think. I think their pace and what they do offensively maybe takes away from them. But they're athletic enough to make plays on defense. It's just not their strong point. But everything points to probably a high scoring game. Do you agree with that, or do you think potentially the nerves could get to teams and maybe it's not as high scoring? Maybe I could see the first half being more. I could see it being more tight than you think, and maybe it opens up in the second half kind of thing. But what are you thinking about this match?
I tend to agree with the latter of what you just said, because I've watched Alabama-Auburn games in Tuscaloosa, and it seems like both teams play relatively tight in the first half, and it takes them a little bit to kind of work through which is obviously, it's just a huge scene there every time Auburn comes to town, and understandably so. It's the same way when Alabama comes to the Nev. So I don't know. I expect it to be tight in the first half, and we'll see. But Mark Sears is the straw that stirs the drink for them. You've got to be able to make sure that whatever you do, you can't allow him to kind of start to get into a groove or a rhythm. If you do that, it's going to be a long night for Auburn. Grant Nelson probably can get the quietest 20 points of any player in the SEC. You just look up, and sometimes he's done more than you thought that he has. But you talked about athletic bigs or being athletic in the post. He's a big part of that. Cliff Amanuri obviously is the other part of that. But you think about the guards from Alabama. You think about, obviously, the storyline with Aiden Holloway. That's a big piece here for Auburn. I think Bruce talked a little bit about that today and how happy he is for Aiden, how it seems to have worked out for both teams. And specifically, I know you're getting ready to laugh at that, but I thought it was
good answer. It's a good answer.
It was a good answer by Bruce. You know what I mean? And then also you think about LeBaron Philon, who's had a sensational freshman year so far. So a former Auburn commitment, obviously decommitted, landed with Kansas, and now at Alabama. So those are probably the players when you think about Alabama's roster. And they've got others. This is a deep team. They are a team that mirrors Auburn from the standpoint of depth and athleticism. They've got it up and down the roster. So this is going to be – it really is going to be a knockdown, drag-out type game. I mean, you're talking about 2 Final Four type teams playing in a packed Coleman Coliseum in front of what's going to be a raucous crowd. And again, I expect them to be a little bit tight in the first half, but for things to open up. Now, if Auburn can keep it tight, if they can keep it close into the final minutes, I do think Auburn's veteran team has an opportunity to take advantage late. Now, I'm not saying that Alabama doesn't have some nice veteran pieces, but Sears is the one you worry about. I think there are multiple players for Auburn that can get theirs in the last minutes. And because of that, I think Auburn has an opportunity to steal one late if they can keep it close. But that's an if, right? Because Alabama has a tendency, if they can put their foot on your throat, they have a tendency to hold it there, man. And they can absolutely run the score up on you. So Auburn's going to have to play its best perimeter defense to this point. You cannot allow them to get off in this game. You got to make sure you suffocate them at the three-point line and push them to get tough twos inside the key. That's what you have to do. You cannot just let them post up out there all night long and shoot uncontested three-point shots. That's a recipe for disaster.
Yeah, somebody asked me, I went on Birmingham radio Thursday morning, and they kind of asked what was maybe the matchup. And, I thought Denver versus Mark Sears was a big one.
Yes.
Just because, like you said, Mark Sears is the catalyst. I mean, in this kind of game with there's enough players that there's a lot of guys that could be an X factor, but ultimately Denver's ability, and Auburn will switch, so it won't always be Denver, but a lot of times Denver's ability to just try and make things difficult on Mark Sears would go a long way. I'd have to go back and look at last year's stats of the game here, the one Auburn won here, but I feel like they did that. Like, I feel like Sears maybe got his, but they made things difficult, Katie, at times. So you just got to make it hard on him as tough as you can and sort of let the chips fall where they may. Certainly down low. I mean, look, Janai, Dillon, Chaney, and they've got, Diabate and Cliff Omoyori, who, can rebound, and they're active and all that good stuff. So I think winning the front line, I mean, anytime Janai, Chaney, and Dillon never need to lose a front line battle. They did against Florida, I thought.
Yeah.
They if they lose the front line battle like that, that'd probably be one thing I'd point to Auburn. If they lose a front line battle then I think you're in trouble. And so they need to come to play. And then we'll kind of see what happens on the perimeter. It'll be interesting to see Aiden. I mean, Aiden's shooting 50% SEC play. Does that keep up? Does he get a little hype because it's Auburn? And that'll be kind of interesting to see sort of how that goes. But I think Denver's ability to try to affect Mark Sears would be big. Or look, the other thing is you could say Mark Sears is going to get yours. Let's go try to shut Aiden down. I mean, Aiden's easier to shut down than Sears. Are there times where Miles is on Aiden, or is there times even where Denver's on Aiden? I would imagine Denver's going to be on Sears the most, but like the kind of defense Miles potentially can play on Aiden. He's got the length on him. Can he keep a hand in his face, and can he make things tough on Aiden, who's been such a good 3-point shooter for them in conference? And you can't let everybody go crazy like we talked about. You got to shut somebody down. But yeah, it's a game that could really go either way. I mean, Alabama's certainly good enough and dangerous enough to blow you out. I mean, if Auburn goes in there and doesn't shoot well and Alabama catches fire, I mean, it's a game that could easily, get ugly in terms of, you could look up and Alabama could be at 15 or whatever. But Auburn's played good enough defense and has been efficient enough on offense that I don't fully expect that to happen. I think they'll hang around. But, man, I don't know. I think it's like what Bruce said. It's one of these games where you're on the road playing this kind of game. You just want to get yourself – I mean, it's similar to football, right? Get yourself to the fourth quarter. That's what you want to do. You want to get under 10 minutes and be in the game.
Yes.
And that's all you can ask for. It's probably going to come out. They're going to come out with a flurry, and just the amount of energy at the start of that game is going to be next level. So don't come out and get blitzed early. That would be a big thing. And then past that, I mean, it's just going to be making plays. Both these teams can shoot and score and rebound, and they're athletic, and like they're trying to say there's one thing. I don't know, because I just think there's enough athletes that can do everything. Both these teams, I think, can do a little bit of everything. So I'm just not sure if there's one specific thing that if Auburn does this, they win. So I don't know. I think it's just going to be a really, really good game, and who makes the most plays in the last 8 minutes of the game type deal. But I don't know. I mean, I think that's if you're an Auburn fan, that's probably what you're thinking, is just get yourself to the last 8-ish minutes, 10 minutes, and then try to make some plays. Maybe hope that they get a little trigger happy and keep shooting threes, and you can kind of be efficient down there But man, it's all about defense. Bruce said today, defense and rebounding wins championships, and we're now playing for championships. Like we're getting to that point. He kind of mentioned after Saturday, there's just 6 games left in league play. Like, so you're getting down to that point of it's defense and rebounding. He mentioned that game last year in Tuscaloosa, they got some late boards, and I vaguely remember that when he said it. There were some offensive rebounds that Grant Nelson got.
Mm-hmm.
They lost that game on the board. So when you play Alabama, you're not going to outscore them. The focus has got to be defense, rebounding. And it's so true with Auburn. They're the number 1 offense in the country, but that's not where their focus needs to be. It always needs to be defend, rebound, and then your offense, I think, will create some good looks. But when they get a little lazy with their defense, when they sort of forget to play defense, that is a bad recipe for this team to do that. When they locked in and engaged defensively, that's when they're really good, because they can turn it into points the other way and things like that. So I don't know, man. It's gonna be a fun classic matchup, man. I hope it's like that again on March 8th.
Agreed.
About this one, and it's like we got another.
I know.
As big. I mean, the rank they might not be 1-2, but there could be more on the line with the March 8th game than even this one. But
no, I mean, I think you're saying all things that are very true, Justin. And if I am going to add one thing that needs to be very different from the Florida game is Auburn has got to do a better job from the charity stripe in this game. They uncharacteristically missed some free throws that would have helped them in that Florida game. You can't afford to have those kind of miscues here if you want to beat Alabama in Tuscaloosa. So you're going to have to make sure that percentage is up and the guys are ready for the moment. But you mentioned it. Defense is the biggest thing. In all 3 of Alabama's losses, Ole Miss, Oregon, and Purdue, I felt like there were stellar defensive efforts by the opposition in those games, and they absolutely won the rebounding battle. So that is the recipe to beating Alabama, and you're going to have them play your pace. I think Auburn needs to force the ball inside a little bit, play inside-outside basketball, but play at your tempo. Don't try to run at theirs. Make sure you run good stuff, get in good sets. Don't rush things. And if you'll reverse the basketball and be patient, play inside out, I think that plays in Auburn's favor, and it will cause Alabama to maybe rush some shots on the other end. They get a little impatient at times when you don't play their pace. So that will be a big thing to me and probably the number 1 thing I watch. Can you control it inside? Can you win the rebounding battle, play good defense, and control the pace? If you can control the pace and force them to play your style of basketball, this is a game that Auburn can 100% win.
Yeah, I think they're trying to see what they're doing. They might be wrapping up here in a minute. I was just looking at Alabama, and by the way, I didn't realize that they hit 17 threes against Texas. That is, looking at the numbers, it's their most efficient offensive game of the season. Alabama's coming off on. Their effective field goal percentage against Texas was 77.3. And they hit 17 threes. That is bonkers. But Texas doesn't really play defense. Let's just be real. So there's that. But you're right. I mean, it took, at Purdue. What's crazy is you look at this Alabama team and you're like, Auburn beat the brakes off Purdue.
Yep.
And yet Purdue beat Alabama. Yeah, now it was at Purdue, true road game. Purdue was able to hold them to 78 points. That's a phenomenal effort.
Yeah.
To hold Alabama to 78. Then you have Oregon that beat them by 2. And then Ole Miss, gosh, how in the heck did Ole Miss hold them to 64? That was easily Alabama's worst. Well, 5 of 20 from 3. Slowed the pace, but maybe you're watching some Ole Miss film if you're Auburn and trying to figure out how in the world they managed to do that. Well, that was turnovers, right?
Yeah,
they turned it over almost 30% of the time in that game. And so maybe that's some things you look at. The Oregon loss was 20%. Purdue just shut them down. They did they can turn the ball over. They got some games in here where they're turning the ball over 1 in 4 times. Georgia. But what's crazy how dangerous Alabama is. Here's the Georgia game. They turned the ball over 25% of the time against Georgia. 1 out of 4, they still scored 90. 1 out of 4, you just gave the ball away and you still scored 90 points. They're just a dangerous team. But I think Auburn, if they're going to win, has got to lean on that defense, keep them to about, well, you don't want them to go above about don't know, man. I don't think you want them to go above about 83, 84. I mean, then you're getting into having to score mid-80s on the road. And Alabama's not a defensive juggernaut, but they're, that's still tough. So I think you want to try to keep them to – if you can keep them to 82, 83, I think you're in it. I think they creep to 85, and you're asking a lot to try to go score more than that on the road. It could look like Auburn, Tennessee last year, where both teams just sort of go off and it becomes a high-scoring game, but hopefully not. I think Auburn's defense has got to keep this thing in check, and hopefully we'll see a really good game. Any last-minute predictions?
No last-minute prediction other than I think it's going to be a really good game. Tight in the first half. I don't want to venture a guess on the game. I don't love Auburn's chances, but I think they've got one. I mean, I think they can. I think they can get this win.
I'm with you on that. I mean, going on the road in the SEC, it's right. We all know how hard that is. So, I mean, if Alabama was coming in here, you'd assume Auburn was going to win. Florida was able to do it here. It's rare, and it takes an A+ effort to win on the road. I mean, it really, against a team like Alabama, that's being real. It's going to take Auburn. It's an absolute A effort to win, but they're capable of it. We'll see how things go. 3:00 Saturday, Auburn, Alabama. I'll be there. It'll be nuts. Check us out at auburnlive.com, Auburn Live YouTube channel. Subscribe, notifications. We'll come back next week. Talk about the week to come, all that good stuff. Appreciate everybody for joining us. For Alan Head, I am Justin Hokanson. We'll see you guys next time.